were talking a little bit earlier before I turned on the record button about things like oils. So, if you want to use oils, what are, okay, I'll call it Monique's rules of thumb about oils. So, the first thing that I want you all to know is this: there are oils that you can use for culinary purposes, which are perfectly acceptable, even though they come from really high oxalate foods. So, when I'm making Christmas cookies, my father was Swiss, all sorts of things had almond in them. I'm so sad. Most of those things I can't eat anymore. But for, I'm going to say, enhancing almond flavor in a cookie, I'll cook with almond oil. Now, almonds themselves are sky high. There is no way I would ever touch an almond again in this lifetime. But almond oil is zero oxalate. So the process of pressing the oil out of the nut, out of the fruit, leaves you with a product which has zero oxalate. So the oxalate's left behind in the structure of that thing. And so this is something we can use to our advantage. So one of the examples I used a few years ago, I haven't posted on this for a while, but walnuts were considered very helpful for breast cancer survivors. They had women eating a certain amount of walnuts a day, and they actually saw a reduction in the recurrence of breast cancer. And breast cancer is not something any of us want to be dealing with. But we don't need the oxalate because, ironically, oxalate is actually a breast cancer trigger. I wrote an article about this on Hormones Matters. I will make sure that I've got the link for that with the show notes for this. So, how can you get the benefits of walnuts without eating walnuts? Walnut oil. It's a great option for a salad dressing if you like the flavor. That's a great way to incorporate some walnut oil into your life. It is a fairly fragile oil. I don't know that I do a lot of cooking with it, but for dressings and things like that, it's a great option. Lovely flavor. There's lots of oils like that where they're being pressed from a nut, and you're going to do fine as long as you're eating the oil and there's no nut material left in it. So hazelnuts, I've seen hazelnut oil. Macadamia nut oil is pretty common now. So those are all things that you can consider. The challenge with some oils would be whether or not they're a source of histamine or they're a source of salicylate. So that'll depend on what your system can handle. So olive oil, while lovely and certainly low oxalate, be a little bit cautious if you are somebody who has salicylate issues, because there's often a bit of the olive left in olive oil, and that can mean it's a source of salicylate. Olive oil is fine for histamine, just not for salicylate. On the other side of the fence, there's avocado oil, another great oil. Definitely low oxalate, but it can be a source of histamine. So there are oils where you might want to avoid them because of the histamine aspect. What I'll say is this: in general, the fresher the oil, the better, because histamine tends to develop in the presence of oxygen. And the challenge then is to ensure that your oil is kept, well, like they do with good quality olive oil. You keep it in a dark glass jar or bottle, preferably. Use it, promptly. Get it from a source where you know it's pretty fresh. Those are probably the basic rules. Okay. And the problem with avocado oil is that as avocados ripen, they become much more prone to histamine. And so if they're taking avocados of various ripeness, you just have no idea how much histamine's in that oil. With nuts, it's a similar thing. What you really want is an oil where it's been pressed from good quality nuts, fresh, blah, blah, blah. Some of that might be checked by contacting the company, or third-party testing might be helpful. I'm kind of hoping that more of these places will get third-party testing. Some products are now testing for histamine. That would be really helpful. And the challenge is really to find out what your body works the best with, because some of us can have unique triggers. Great example of the whole histamine and unique triggers is that I do quite well with rendered duck fat. It is tasty. I do almost all my cooking with it. And yet for some people, duck fat will have too much histamine. So we also have to find out, kind of titrate where our personal levels are, that can cause a bit more complexity to the whole thing. But, good quality animal fats, again, fresh, kept fresh, or like rendered tallow, rendered lard, if they're done fresh and then frozen, can be a great option. But some meats, like poultry, have some histamine that's present in the skin. And so while rendered duck fat works great for me, it would be an experiment for anybody. So don't buy big amounts until you've had a chance to use it. But I've been told that duck fat for frying is awesome. Like deep frying, I don't do any deep frying myself, but I've been using it for cooking other things like pork chops and things. Very good. Just kind of an interesting point. Lard actually has the same fat in it that avocados do. So while we don't hear a lot about using lard as a fat, I did grow up long enough ago that I remember my aunt using lard to make pies, and there is good nutrient in there. So don't automatically count something out unless for some reason you don't like it. Like that's fair enough, but don't automatically count it out just because you've never eaten something that was cooked in lard, because I've done that now too. So lots of benefits in these different kinds of fats. It's just a matter of cross-checking on some of the things like salicylate and things like histamine. But it's a very good news story that any oil, you see something, it's suppressed oil, you're fine. That's low oxalate. So if you see that in a list of ingredients, you're fine. It's low oxalate. Now, some oils are better for you than others, but from an oxalate standpoint, if you're looking at something to try and figure out an oxalate level and you've got an oil somewhere in those first 5 ingredients, that's a bonus.